Thanks, Manu. So Akshay and I will just, I'll get started and then Akshay is going to talk about the meat of the presentation, since Manu has elevated me to a level that I can delegate. So anyway, this is really a great topic today. Reimagining education is a theme that I actually gave because when we started Krea, and this was with another alum who unfortunately hasn't joined today, Kapil Vishwanathan, and when we got together, we sort of started discussing this topic. Can we reimagine education? And the context was that Kapil was an entrepreneur who had exited a company and was thinking of doing something. And he didn't want to just do something because, you know, after an entrepreneur, you become a VC or do another company. He was thinking deep and reflecting as to what matters to him, what will matter to the community, the society, to the country. So we were having this conversation, and he had this conversation with several people, and we talked about, you know, what is happening in the world today. How is the 21st century different? Now, Kapil is a much younger alum, a much younger friend. He had young kids, and my kids were already at Stanford. So we were both looking at the world with two different lenses of parents who were, you know, had different expectations from life, but we both converged on the fact that the 21st century is so different for our kids, no matter what their age is. And, you know, what we concluded was that the challenges of 21st century, and this has been touched upon by the previous speaker, are so different. And we see it all the more today when so much uncertainty has engulfed us. You know, that we have a complexity which has never been seen before in generations. We have human-machine interaction. Of course, there's human-human, human-machine, and human nature. And in addition, there is the machine-machine interaction, which is bringing, so obviously that is going to impact how we learn and how learners, when they become leaders, what are the skills that they will need. So next, the 20 in mind, we were just thinking, is there education, are there education institutions in the world today, globally, which are really geared for the changes which are, you know, rapidly enveloping us? And, you know, the change is very, very rapid, right? And there are, besides the whole machine-human interaction, there are such complex issues on identity, for example, and purpose in an increasingly global society. You know, there are issues of purpose and social impact. You know, how does one keep changing careers, and how does one really learn? How does one have a sense of purpose? And the question we sort of were battling with is, higher educational institutions, even the best in the world, are all, you know, rather old. Even our young Stanford is more than 125 years old now. So, you know, are they really geared for 21st century even as they change? Can we come up with a paradigm which is purely for the 21st century and takes into account some of these dynamic changes? And how do we create leaders to face the complex world that we are facing today, along with a very strong moral compass embedded within it? Because all these complexities, that's what is going to drive. So while all these seemed, you know, nice things to say and put on a PPT, how do we convert this into a real, you know, project? So when we started, what we found was that academic leaders and business leaders alike resonated with this idea like we hadn't imagined. And Kapil, of course, took it forward with great gusto. And we got leaders from the business world like Mr. Vagul of ICICI, and he brought in a whole bunch of other business leaders and top academicians, including our own John Echimandeep, the vice provost, the provost of Stanford, ex-provost of Stanford, who really got this, that most of the education institutions globally are not really geared to, you know, train students in higher education with this background. So can we really have a new paradigm? And that's what we started doing. We were lucky to get a phenomenal support from both the business world as well as the academics. We got a great people like Akshay, who were, you know, who had done education at Stanford, you know, had worked on the famous Education Act of the Andhra government. And we started the project, which is today, you know, the first batch is, you know, already there in Krea, in Sri City in Andhra. And we really came up with a new paradigm of learning with a new pedagogy called interwoven education, interwoven learning. And I'm going to hand it over now to Akshay to really go deep into what we are doing right now. And then we'll try to wrap it up with, you know, what's next. Over to you,
Well,
Akshay.
thank you so much, Paula. And before I begin, I just want to maybe take about 30 seconds to share my own journey and why I found Krea and Krea's vision so compelling. Uh, so I grew up in Old Delhi, and I had a fairly sort of normal education up till the age of 14. When something quite strange happened in my school, the Ministry of Education from Singapore came over to publicize their scholarship, the pre-university scholarship. So by chance, I stumbled upon that. I took that examination, ended up moving to Singapore at a very young age when I was 14, and then ended up spending 8 years of my life independently, just living in Singapore and figuring out life on my own. So I did my pre-university and university education there for 8 years. And that's when I was really having these conversations with my peers back home. Both their high school and university education looked very different compared to what I was getting at my high school and then my university in NUS. That really compelled me to come back and work, start first of all exploring the field of education before trying to create some sort of impact. And then I worked with various organizations, and Andhra Pradesh government was one such organization. It's very inspiring to work on their AP Private Universities Act. I was also working in Bihar with another social entrepreneur, a friend of mine who was building an organization called Project Potential. They ended up going to Stanford to study more and understand the literature and the research that's going on in this field to really get a sort of holistic understanding of what's happening in education and what we need to do in the 21st century. And that's where I met the Vice Chancellor at Stanford, Dr. Sundar, back in 2018. And I found the project and the vision very compelling. And that's why I came back, joined the organization back in August of 2018, and I've had a very, very interesting journey. And some of what I will be sharing today is based on those learnings and insights. So as Paula said, really having these end goals in mind, which are much more sort of higher level compared to just knowledge transfer or information transfer, is much more about creating a sense of learning to learn, having a sense of ethics, having a sense of morality, but also very importantly having a sense of purpose, because we are in an age where all of us are inundated by you can do this, you can be whatever you want, the whole internet is out there for you to learn. So having sort of all of these opportunities at our disposal, it also becomes very difficult for young adults to really understand what their place in the world is. So firstly, beginning with curriculum, as Paula mentioned, the approach at Krea has been what we are calling interwoven learning. And our academic council had come up with 7 or 8 themes which we thought were really very interesting. And of course, when we say this interwoven learning paradigm is trying to push the frontiers of even the models conceived earlier. So there have been many, many models in higher education. One of them has been liberal arts and sciences. So we're trying to even reconceive that notion of giving the students liberty to choose, but taking that further and seeing how we can create new elements. So if you see some of these 7 or 8 elements that are listed here, the approach is really that these elements get reinforced again and again throughout the curriculum and the journey of a student at Krea. So some of these are writing intensivity, research, interdisciplinary elements, ethics, a sense of historicity, data analytics, a sense of immersive learning. So what you do in your summer, what you do with your internships or projects or experiential learning, unanswered question, because being comfortable with uncertainty is also very important. So these elements, even if you're, let's say, a math major, one of the things that one of our academic council members pointed out, that mathematicians don't really learn how to write for mathematics. So you usually have courses which are an elective, which is a checkbox. You take a writing course in the first year, but then in your second year, third year, you go on and do your majors, but don't really revisit some of these things. So what we are thinking, and that's very in the logo itself, you'll see the interwoven strands means that writing appears again and again. So even for a mathematics major, when they're doing their second year course or a third year course, writing comes back again, or historicity comes back again. You trace the arc of the ideas in the field. Ethics comes back again. So it's not just a generic ethics course, but it's about ethics as it will inform a mathematician, or ethics as it inform a biologist. So these strands, these 7, 8 strands, we thought were the real bedstones of our curriculum. And these will rear their head again and again throughout the 2 or 3 year journey of a student at Krea. And that's why these get reinforced. And when a student comes out, or a mathematics major or an economics major comes out of Krea, they will really be well versed with all of these. And then that creates a sense of, learning how to learn and come back to these themes again and again. And interspersed with that, I'll talk a lot about student life later, which I've been doing for the last 6 months, building this Office of Student Life at Krea, is also inculcating along with these a sense of reflection, a sense of purpose through immersive learning, working with partners, real world organizations where you can hone all of these skills and bring them to life. So that's the first strand I wanted to talk about, which is curriculum. The second, which has been very interesting for me, because I was very heavily involved with building the admissions process last year, uh, we really, when we started building the admissions process, we said that start from zero, zero background, zero sort of assumptions in terms of how other universities have done it. So if you really take a first principles approach, what are you trying to measure? What are you trying to filter for? So we again went back to the 4 graduate attributes that we wanted to inculcate, and then filter them down to a more basic level, how we can sort of value or get some of these values tested in an admissions process and build something from scratch that is quite unique. That's why we came up with this idea of Krea immersive cases. Some of you might have heard of them, and we've just moved them online because of the COVID situation. So the overall aim was, of course, to build a class, not to select one student, but to build a class that truly reflects the diversity of India, have holistic assessments. So we have 2 stages. One is an online application form. The second is the Krea immersive case. So we don't rely on singular cutoffs. The whole process is based on looking for various things: curiosity, empathy, teamwork, creativity, and self-awareness. I'll talk about the Krea immersive cases on the next slide. But this was a very interesting philosophical approach we took, that we are driven by a selection mindset. So we were not looking for reasons to reject candidates, but rather the approach was to see how candidates can express themselves in various ways. And what are the reasons where I find a spark or a flare? Can I pick on that and then try to explore further and get the student to speak or write or whatever they're comfortable with? So we're really driven by a selection mindset that makes the ethos of the admissions team very different compared to other ways of doing admissions. And finally, of course, we had a layer of need blind attached to this. So the admissions team doesn't have any access to the financial aid data. There's a separate financial assistance team which gives out scholarships, and we were very happy that we got a lot of students from various backgrounds. Almost half of our class, the first cohort that we built, which just enrolled back in August 2019, 50% of the students received some sort of financial aid, and almost 20% were on full financial aid. So that was quite interesting for us. Now, I'll take you through this Krea immersive cases, which have been a very, very interesting experiment for us. So what we said is, usually when you have admissions, you have the first stage, which is online application form. And the second stage is just sort of an interview of some sort. We said that, okay, we are talking about immersive learning. If we really want to see how students do, not just sitting in a classroom setting, but also applying some things that they've learned, we said that why don't we take students out to real world sites, which might be very exciting for students, and have an art and a science faculty come along with them and let them look at the world through multiple disciplinary perspectives. So in both of those cases, you will see one is a set of students who are in Koramangala looking at the street graffiti, and then the other is a case in Bombay near the gateway of India. And so what usually happens is the students are taken by faculty, and then the faculty lays down what we call a case. It's like a case study where there's a case statement which you can analyze from multiple perspectives. So it's really catering to students coming from all sorts of academic streams. There will be some prompts or nudges that the faculty will have, which will be compelling to an art student. Some of them will be compelling to a science student. And when you go out there and you're doing field work, you're talking to local stakeholders, and you're constantly asking questions to the faculty, we're able to see your curiosity on the ground, your application of what you've learned in the classroom on the ground. And that really allows us to filter for a very different kind of student who may not just be excelling in the academics of the textbook and the classroom, but also are able to apply some of this in the real world and think very differently, work together with their peers very differently. So when they come back after this field trip, they write a small reflective essay, they do some group work, and finally we have group presentations and one-on-one conversations. So it's a very engaging, very intensive one-day process, which we've now moved online. I just was part of these a couple of days ago. And I mean, given all the constraints, they still worked out quite well. And this has been a very, very interesting find for us in terms of doing admissions quite differently. And after having interviewed so many people through this process, many students come back and tell us that this has been life-changing for them in some way, because they have not experienced any university doing admissions like this or looking at their candidature in this way, which is so holistic. We don't rely on just your 10th grade or 12th grade, but rather through your performance throughout this day. So it really makes them feel comfortable. And as I said, it's coupled with the selection mindset. So we are not putting any pressure on them and grilling them, but really trying to get the best out of their own experience. So this is one thing that we did quite differently, and which has led to the kind of students who have come in are very, very interesting, come from all walks of life, and are very curious and willing to apply what they're learning to the real world. And the second and my last slide is actually to talk about student life, which I've been working on. So I moved out of the Office of Admissions and now working with the Office of Student Life. So the 3 things that have been the pillars for us is student governance, student wellness, and student community. And all three, I think, are very important, which at least in India, the universities don't pay enough attention to. And that's where really a lot of the learning outside curriculum takes place. So for governance, for example, we are again trying to link whatever they're learning in the classroom to how they build their own community. So if they're taking a course on exploring the social and historical, or if they're taking a course in ethics, then how does that spill over into how they govern their own community? Similarly, for wellness, that one insight for us has been quite alarming, that mental health issues for this generation are very uh, very difficult to deal with, because they are, maybe I think some of the earlier speakers spoke about this, the Gen Z and Gen Alpha, their interaction with the digital world is very different. So it's hard for us to find counselors or support systems that cater to that particular audience. But that has also been a very interesting learning. We are now doing peer-to-peer counseling and having students build a sense of camaraderie within themselves and understand what works in terms of the science of wellness, the essential nature of getting 8 hours of sleep, and gratitude, expressing gratitude. And then finally, student community, which is also through all the various activities they do, be it in dance and sports and fine arts and so on. But I think looking at this as a very holistic piece, again, we don't want to silo ourselves as saying this is student life, this is curriculum. The way we conceive a day for a student at Krea is that learning spills throughout the day, and you try to make these connections and weave every aspect of your life together and learn throughout the day. So that's been some of the experiences that we have had. Happy to take questions now.
Thank you so much. That was amazing.
Yeah, actually, maybe you can take some. I'll just answer the one on ethics.
Yeah.
So we don't teach ethics as a separate subject in a philosophy department or any department. It's woven into every subject. So it's ethics of biology, ethics of computer science, ethics of even literature. So it's taught very much as an integrated thing, and critical thinking is what makes you decide what is the true north. And it is not like a structured moral education kind of thing. But it's a very important part, and they're co-taught many times. The subject matter expert with a totally different. It doesn't have to be a philosophy major or a English major, a teacher. Anybody, two teachers will come together and teach ethics of environment or something. So, but it's a very key part. Akshay, do you want to take some of the questions? I'll try to call through.
Sure. So there's a question: is there a course that everyone needs to take, irrespective of their discipline? If not, how did you go about deciding what to learn? So we do have core and skill courses. What we call the core and skill courses in the first year. These are 11 courses which really form the foundation of your learning, and then in the second year, you can declare your major after having taken those courses. And these courses range from, as I said, exploring the social and historical. You have a course on writing, you have a course on literature and the arts, you have a course on scientific reasoning, mathematical reasoning. And these tell you more than anything else how to think like a mathematician, how to think like a scientist, how to think like a person who's an artist. So instead of actually learning real mathematics, it's about learning how to think like a mathematician, because in the first year it's about exposing you to the discipline. And then if you want to be a mathematician, if you're fascinated by how a mathematician thinks, then you can major in mathematics and take that as your core subject. Then we had a question on summer courses. So we do plan to have a summer school. This summer may not be possible, but next summer onwards. And some of these might be online offering as well. And there's a question on what disciplines are taught. So disciplines we have, I think right now, 10 majors, 5 in the arts, 5 in the sciences. So in arts, we have majors ranging from politics, history, economics, and so on. And then science, we have environmental sciences. These are still your core arts and science courses, but because of the pedagogy, they're taught in very different ways. As I said, a mathematics major at Krea will look different from other institutions. I realize it will be some time before you have alumni, but any thoughts on how you'd like to offer continued education? I think that's an important stand for us. We do want to think about and how all of our classes have moved online, which have surprisingly been quite effective, and it'll be interesting to hear from others as well. Some faculty have been saying there's more engagement in the online years or being pressured into discussions. So they actually are able to speak more frequently. They're able to chat and type out, say. So that's been quite interesting. And some of that might help us design continued education after we have alumni. Student governance structures, that is an interesting one. So we write by this topic, and they really try to bring whatever they've learned in the classroom here. One important decision they took, we had a lot of these what we call town hall meetings in the first month. And this was like 11 p.m. and all of them used to gather and have these discussions. Professors used to join as well. So right now they have an interim government, which is non-hierarchical. They have 4 or 5 committees. There's an extracurricular committee, there's an academic committee, there's a finance committee, there's a campus life committee. As an interim structure, they also formed a constituent assembly because this is the first cohort, which is a unique situation in life of any university. So they want to give themselves a constitution. They formed a student constituent assembly. And there are 9 students who are right now researching and writing the constitution. So let's see what they come up with. That would be quite interesting.